Hi, my name is Cass Clark, and I'm from CBR.
How are you? Good to
Hi,
meet you.
good to meet you too. So my first thing is just congrats on Scream 6 being greenlit. Like, that's fantastic.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Do you remember your first thought when you heard that news?
Yes, I mean, to be perfectly honest, we were kind of like, it's sort of, there were grumblings of it. And then when it officially announced, I mean, there are no takebacks. Once it hits the trades, there's no takebacks, Cass. They're stuck with us now.
Well, I'm happy about that. So Scream in general has always been about breaking horror rules, redefining them, breaking them again. So I was curious for this one, was there one expectation that you were really excited to just mess around with and break?
I think for us, the thing that we were most excited about, and it's, for us, when we first read the script, I mean, we were having the experience that, the audience has watching it for the first time, just sort of going like, what's the design of this? Like, where is it going? What's the manipulation of the movie? Is getting to the end, and without spoiling anything, the context reframe that happens at the end of the movie. I think for us, what was so fun was then going back and going, wow, the entire movie, the way that the movie is designed and the scenes within the movie, the way that those are designed, that there's some grand idea behind all of it. And there was something so cool about being fans of these movies and wanting to design something really unique, but then also having characters within the movie wanting to do the same thing was so awesome for us. It felt like it was one of a million layers of meta-ness and of self-reflexivity that we kept sort of finding as we were peeling back, moment to moment, the story of the movie. And it was just such a well thought out, like wonderfully formed script. We were so thrilled with what Guy and Jamie achieved with this one.
And one of my favorite things about Scream's trailer when it dropped was we had a small glimpse of Sidney as a mom with that little baby carriage. And I was so excited to see Sid as a mom in this iteration of her life. So when you were forming how that would look on screen with Neve Campbell, what were maybe some ground rules that you had around how to show that side of her?
We wanted to make it clear from get-go when you saw Sid, she's moved on. She's accepted it. She's living her life. She's happy. You feel that's why it's like, it's by the water and it's just an idyllic setting. And it just feels, oh, she's good. And I think that was really important to us to, and it comes from the script, obviously, but like the idea that Sid has moved on, Ghostface has not. And then that kind of becomes the, let's have that be the fun thing that she has to deal with in this.
And you mentioned in prior interviews that some chase/kill scenes change once you're on set, as happens,
Yeah.
So I would love to know, how do you know when a kill scene is working, and what are some signs that you're like, we wanted it to, but we have to scrap it. We have to do something completely different. What are some like signals for you?
Well, I mean, when you have a good line producer and a good producer, they signal right away if you don't have enough time or money to do what you want to do, which is a very valuable relationship to have. I think for us too, though, there's just a feeling of excitement. I think a lot of that is just an intuition, and I think so much of what that intuition is for us is because of our love of these movies. I think that we know, when you're shooting a sequence, whether it feels like Scream or not. And then I think the other sort of part of that is they're really fun. I think for us, we talk often about how when you're shooting a scare or a real specific horror moment, that oftentimes for us, we know it's working when it actually feels really funny. There's something, it almost feels like you're shooting a comedy. And a lot of that is just about finding ways to create so much tension and to keep like tightening the screws that you're sort of laughing, like waiting for that big reveal to happen. And when you're shooting sequences like that, you're just trying to create some approximation of that. And you really feel it when it's working. It's really oftentimes those takes end with everybody laughing. And that's a really good sign for us that people are having fun in the making of it. That's a really, really good, good sort of roadmap to follow.
So in this film and also in Ready or Not, there's a lot of hand gouging. So I just want to know with Radio Silence, what is your
Radio
love
silence,
gouging?
signature hand
Why?
wound.
But
Yeah,
really what attracts you to that scare? Because it's so effective, but now I'm like expecting it. I'm like, there's gonna be a hand gouge.
Well, it's funny. We had the writer, one of the writers is the same on Scream and Ready or Not, and the writer on Scream was the producer on Ready or Not. So it feels like maybe this is a question for a lot of us. But yeah, no, it's funny. I think you want, especially because we're used to working at lower budgets, and like Ready or Not's a lower budget movie. And I think there's something specific about a hand gouge that is so personal, and it is so scary, and it is so like, it's so understandable. It's like, it's relatable is not quite the right word, but it just gets you like in the, yeah. And I think especially when you're working on a lower budget thing, it's very achievable. And it can give you that thing of like, our character needs to go through something awful right now. Yeah. And the funny thing about the Ready or Not one is, I think the hardest part of the Ready or Not one for the character and for us as an audience is not when it goes in her hand, it's when she takes it off.
Yeah.
And it's that moment that, at least for me, is always like, oh, Jesus. But yeah, we have a joke that we now have the hand gouging and a ghost nod at the end of our movies. Those are
movies moving forward. I think what you're saying too, Cass, is that we think is so interesting is that when something like that happens to your hand, which obviously we interact so much with, in the world with our hands, that every single thing after an injury like that is an obstacle.
Yeah,
right?
it's harder.
Even the easiest thing is now 100 times harder because you're injured in a way that's really, significant. And that for us is like, the more you can stack obstacles on top of a character, the better. That just makes for a really thrilling, fun, intense story.
And I have just a general franchise question for both of you. So for a franchise that's all about Maureen's life and death, for the most part, and also obviously Sidney, do you feel satisfied with how the franchise overall has treated her story? Do you have any hopes of having her have a bigger role in other films?
It's interesting. I mean, we talk about that a lot because it's funny. It's like every story has to have a backstory, right? There has to be like a stopgap for how far back is the story we need to tell go. And for us, again, as I'm speaking more as a fan, not as someone who made a Scream movie, but I've always thought the Maureen storyline is so interesting because the character points of view on it are so, I mean, they're awful, right? They're like horrible. It's like, but there's something in that makes everything that happens as a result all the more tragic, all the more interesting, all the more just like rich. I hate to make it sound good, but complicated. Yeah, it's more complicated because it's like, I mean, she had an affair. That's what she did. It's not like, it's not like she deserves to be murdered.
No one should pay that price.
No, and to have that kind of thing just turn into this monster after monster is so fascinating. And I think, especially like the way we live now with the internet and stuff, that idea of a small thing becoming something awful is really prevalent. So, I mean, that doesn't really answer your question, but I would love to talk about Maureen. It's very interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it's like what you're saying is we've seen Maureen's story through the eyes of all these other characters. And she's barely on the screen, and I mean, she's only technically ever on the screen once as a ghost. So I always love asking that for fans and for now directors in the franchise are like how you see her.
Well, there's also something really interesting to us, and I think part of it is, we made a movie that's very much about legacy, but it's sort of interesting to kind of frame the whole franchise as a movie that starts with the idea of a legacy, right? That Sidney kind of inherits this thing from her mom, right or wrong. She sort of is paying the price for something that's happened in the past. And that for us is just always a really interesting idea. When a character living in the moment is having to kind of reconcile themselves with something that's happened in their past, or with somebody that they have an attachment to in their past. And, for us, certainly Sam Carpenter is a proxy for that idea in so many ways, right? And her connection to Billy and all of that, that for us is just such an interesting world to explore.